To HBTV. I'm Harry Binswanger, the HB in HBTV. I advocate Ayn Rand's philosophy of objectivism, and today it's Ask Harry Anything. There's quite a range. There's only 2 questions that have come in so far. There's a minimum of 20 pounds or $25. And let's take the first one. Could Dagny's actions in Atlas Shrugged, obviously, the character Dagny Taggart, by effectively aiding and abetting, or at least sanctioning, Reardon's deception of his wife during their affair, be considered immoral? So there's a lot of interruptions in the grammar there. Let me recast it. Could Dagny's actions regarding Reardon's deception of his wife be considered immoral because they effectively aided and abetted, or at least sanctioned, deception? No. There's a strange, well, I mean, that's a little bit too negative. There's too much of a traditional attitude towards values and morality in the question. I mean, it's a pretty good question. Let me be passive aggressive here about this. It shows thought, and it's a question that doesn't answer itself on the surface. You immediately, readers of Atlas Shrugged would immediately think, no, Dagny wouldn't do anything immoral. And Lillian Reardon, his wife, was evil. But I think it calls for a really thoughtful question about the purpose of morality and the way you apply morality, properly apply morality. Morality is a tool for you to live your life successfully. It is like a manual to an app. It's like instructions for how to use a tool successfully. It is not tablets brought down from Mount Sinai that you'll be damned and sent to eternal torment if you break. On the other hand, it is principles. The principles of morality are objective and absolute, but they exist within a context. And the context is that you are running your life. You're not running someone else's life. So Dagny is not in charge of Reardon. Dagny is not in a position to even decide whether Reardon is right to be married, to be doing something that is ordinarily against the marriage contract. She doesn't know his relationship. Reardon says nothing in the novel about his relationship with his wife. Marriage is not ownership. You, by agreeing to marry someone, ordinarily that means to cleave unto him or her exclusively. It doesn't have to mean that. Ayn Rand herself had an affair, but that was without deception. She got permission of her husband and of the wife of the person she had the affair with. But it's a little bit Victorian, I think, in the attitude, but the main point of the question, the main point is that you are responsible for yourself, and you don't take responsibility for the choices of other people. The issue of sanctioning comes up if you have enough knowledge to know whether something is being done wrong. Now, Reardon wasn't doing anything wrong. So if Dagny had known the full context and all the facts, if she had questioned him about it, she still would have had the affair. So the one point I want to make is the marriage relationship is not a religious contract. It is not, everybody does not have the same contract. Everybody does not have the same agreement. A marriage is not the same at different times, newlyweds and 40 anniversary. And you don't know how the other person is treating the first person. That is, Dagny did not know how Lillian was treating Reardon. She must have had suspicions because she saw what kind of person Lillian was at the party when Lillian was attacking Hank by attacking Reardon metal, not saying it was unsafe or anything, but by treating it as an object of derision and contempt. If you remember that scene, that figures prominently into Dagny's evaluation of Lillian, not based on anything that Hank Reardon said, but on direct observation. So Reardon had a mistaken view. Reardon had the view I'm criticizing. I gave my word. It's a contract. I can't break it. But then he broke it. He had the wrong view of marriage. He had the view that it was a commitment for life, regardless of what he learned about the nature of Lillian. That's a mistake. Fortunately, he acted to have an affair with Dagny and eventually divorced Lillian, as you doubtless know. So it's not the case even that all lying is wrong, that all deception is wrong. There's deception to preserve a value from that which would destroy it without right. And that's what Reardon was doing. He was defending himself. He was defending a value. His mistake was he didn't immediately divorce Lillian. And this, it's very interesting. One of the questions I asked in the old MBI lectures was, when Reardon signed the gift certificate, now if you haven't read Atlas Shrugged, there's enough plot twists and turns that will not be a spoiler, but it's a mini spoiler, micro spoiler. The question I asked, when Reardon signed the gift certificate to protect Dagny, was he making a mistake? Was that right? Was that the correct thing to do? Because I couldn't tell from the novel whether the author thought that he was doing the right thing or the wrong thing. And the answer I got back was, it was wrong. It was an error of knowledge. It comes from the same premise that Reardon and Dagny shared that kept them from going on strike earlier. Now I'm really giving away a plot. Which Ayn Rand in her notes to herself described as overgenerosity. It's a willingness to bear too much. So Reardon was, thinking he had to pay for his own mistakes and that this was a mistake, but it wasn't, the affair wasn't a mistake. He was being blackmailed about the affair, and he thought he had to protect Dagny. But that was a mistake. Dagny didn't need protecting in that regard. She was proud of her affair. And he was not held. He was not bound by an agreement that the other party had broken. So Reardon was doing the right thing in having the affair, but he was in conflict. Dagny was doing the right thing in having the affair, although she could witness Reardon's conflict and feel sympathy for it as she did. All right, okay. The other is the Victorian attitude, which if there is a value that is as high on your scale, I don't want to make a principle out of this, but you can make an exception to say honoring a contract, which is an important thing and is normally an absolute. But if a life-altering value comes your way and you're not harming anyone by breaking the contract, even if you are, break the contract and pay for it. That's what Reardon thought he was doing, paying for it when he signed the gift certificate. But, you know, we're often asked the question, well, suppose you're absolutely starving and there's a cart of apples and you could grab an apple and eat it and keep yourself from starving and live another day. Should you do it? Or you shouldn't do it according to your property rights on you. No, you should do it. I mean, this is not Ayn Rand speaking, this is me speaking. Do it and pay the price, which is if you have to go to jail, okay. If you are able, you're not going to spend your life starving, you're going to make some money, pay back the vendor tenfold. So there are times when the motto, take what you want and pay for it, allows exceptions in extremis, you know, that phrase on in extremis, under dire life-affecting, life-saving or life-giving meaning to circumstances. That was a long interruption. Where morality would say, okay, go ahead, but pay the price. And that's what Reardon did, and that's what Dagny did. And she did pay a price. What is the price that Dagny paid? Well, watching Reardon's suffering and having Reardon go on the radio and torture himself, and then she went on the radio and no, sorry, he didn't go on the radio. Having Reardon give up, watching Reardon give up his most precious achievement. And she had to go on the radio and say that she was his mistress and she was proud of it. That wasn't a big negative for her, but it was the price. Price doesn't have to be a big negative. Anything else? Daniel, did we get any questions on that during my talk about that?
Nope.
No, okay. Let's go to the other question. Why was induction ever a problem? And how was it solved? That's like contradictory phrasing. Perhaps he means, why was induction in the past a problem? And I understand it's been solved. How was it solved? And there's other parts of the question, but let's take that. What was the problem of induction, or what is it for those who are not familiar with the Leonard-Peikoff solution? It's pretty simple. It goes back to probably to the ancient Greeks, but certainly Hume popularized it. Just because you see the same thing happening again and again, like water boiling when it reaches 212 degrees, how do you know it will happen the next time? How do you say all water boils when it reaches 212 degrees? How do you know the sun will rise tomorrow? Hume said, how do I know from memory that something falling from the sky and otherwise resembling snow has yet the feeling of fire and the taste of salt? So it's the question of how do we apply past observations to new cases? Just because it happened this way in the past doesn't mean that necessarily is going to happen that way in the future. I don't see any necessary connection when I look at these events. I just see A happens and then B happens. Now, that's been insoluble. And when I say insoluble, I mean nobody made the slightest dent in that problem. No one gave a theory. The best theories are about probabilities, which beg the question. You can't prove it that way. Now, you might say, well, there's cause and effect. If the same cause is operating, the same effect is going to occur. And Hume says, well, how do you know that? And what is this thing, causality? I don't see any cause. All I see is the billiard ball hitting another billiard ball and the second billiard ball moving in a certain way. I see something falling from the sky, looking white. And when I feel it on my hand, it feels cold. And then when I taste it, it tastes like water. But how do I get to causal connections? That itself is an induction. So it's not that you can say, and let me push this, it's not that you can say, well, probably. I mean, it's happened so many times in the past that probably it'll happen. If you can't say necessarily, but you can say statistically, it's very likely, very, very likely. Hume smashes that argument. And some people, a lot of people who talk about, well, their degrees of probability, they're no absolutes, but their degrees of probability, are ignorant of the crushing answer Hume gave to that in the 1700s. And it's this. You say it's probable based upon the sample of experiences you've had, which have all been the right way. Well, what's the probability that you counted them correctly? What's the probability that you're reasoning correctly? You've made mistakes in the past. Why, just last week, you were balancing your checkbook and you realized you made a mistake and you had to redo it. Or, to take a more modern example, you wrote 30 lines of code and you found 15 errors in that when you debugged it. And then a lot of people make mistakes. So how do you know in that reasoning that you didn't make a mistake? And what are you going to say? Well, rarely do I make a mistake if it's not complicated, like writing code. So I'll assign a probability. It's like 9 out of 10 that I didn't make a mistake in my reasoning about water boiling at 212 based on evidence. Okay, so now it's not 99.9% likely that water boils when heated to 212. It's 99.99 times 9 out of 10. And what's the probability that you didn't make a mistake there? It doesn't matter how high it is, make it 999 billion out of a trillion. You would discount. You discount the certainty you had. And what's the probability that you didn't make a mistake there? So you have an infinite sum of probabilities that the probabilities are that the probabilities are the, and what does that infinite sum go to? Zero. There's never an end to the question, how do you know that wasn't a mistake? And no matter how confident you are below 100%, you're whittling away at that probability of the original statement. So because probabilities multiply to, if they're independent events, they multiply. They go to zero if there are no certainties. If every additional reflection is only probable, the probability sums to zero. Hume gave that argument. He's absolutely right. If there's no certainty, there's no probability. Probability is based on certainty. You know you saw the sun come up. You know you can rely on your memory that the sun rose in the past. You know that you're looking at the thermometer in the water and that it's reading 212 or 100 Celsius. You can rely on that 100%. If there's no certain evidence, there's no way to calculate degrees of evidence. So there has to be certainty. If everything is probable, then nothing has any probability by probability theory. And then what's the probability of the probability theory is wrong? Well, it doesn't matter what you say. If you're not certain of it, that too makes it converge to zero. So it's a big problem. Now, objectivism provides a solution, and I didn't come up with it. I tried. I thought I made progress, but when I read Leonard Peikoff's solution, I realized, no, this is the right way, and it's so clear and obvious. The right answer is given in the first chapter, which is the only chapter I endorse in the book, The Logical Leap. The other chapters I'm not so sure are correct, but in the first chapter, the author is presenting Leonard Peikoff's theory and worked with Leonard Peikoff to make sure he was presenting it correctly. The other chapters are on the history of science, and I've heard them called into question. And of course, Leonard Peikoff is not an authority in the history of science. He is on philosophy. Okay, so what is the solution? Well, the first step it blew my mind when I heard it. Don't start in midstream. There's a hierarchy. Just as there's a hierarchy of concepts, and you wouldn't ask, well, how do I form the concept? The problem of universals, how do I find a universal in all cases of justice or antique or square root? You don't start there. You say, how do I form the concept table or dog or man or cookie? You start with the first concepts that a child can form directly from perception, which is preconceptual. And the same thing here. You don't start with 200. Can you imagine a 2-year-old thinking, well, does water always boil at 200? He doesn't even know what boiling is, let alone temperature or degrees or 212. What is that? 212. He doesn't know 1, 2, 3. But there are generalizations that he can observe. And these are the foundational generalizations, first level generalizations, Dr. Peikoff calls it, such as when it rains, the ground gets wet. The wind blows the leaves. Pushing a ball makes it roll. Paper burns in the fireplace when there's a fire. Fire burns paper. Water slakes my thirst. Now, he doesn't have the concepts for those things, but he knows that water has this property, that paper and fire will act that way, that the rain falls on the ground and wets it. And that is certain in his context of knowledge. It's certain even though there is fireproof paper. Even though there are flames, I presume, that are too, not of wood, but of a fireplace, but of certain gases that are too low to burn certain hard pieces of paper, I guess. Let's say there are. It's flammable. Even though maybe there's some kind of, heavy water, the isotope, which wouldn't slake his thirst, I doubt that's true. Even though the rain does not wet the ground in the desert, I don't know if you know this, but in very hot areas of the desert, the rain doesn't make it all the way to the ground in some cases. At least I read this in the Amazing Facts magazine that I read when I was 8. But it starts to rain, from 10,000 feet down to, 2,000 feet, it's rain, but by the time it gets beyond that, it's evaporated again. So it never hits the ground. So even though there are weird circumstances that can interfere with the regular succession, his knowledge is not such as to be claiming otherwise. And this is the second of the 3 points, that knowledge is contextual. Learning that paper can be treated so it won't burn does not contradict paper burns in fire. Rather, it expands your knowledge of what fire and paper do, because that's a new factor. And when he's saying paper burns in fire, he doesn't know about flame retardant. I don't know if flame retardant is the right word. So exceptions are always due to some cause, and the original statement on the first level is not, the child doesn't know enough to know about subtleties. Now, there's a very small class, and that's probably not true. There's a very limited class of first-level generalizations which are, in effect, axiomatic. And some that you would think of as first-level aren't. I don't think, for instance, pushing a ball makes it roll is first-level. I think pushing a ball moves it is, but rolling is a little more sophisticated than I would call first-level. But that's arguable. But let's take something that you would think, eating good food makes me grow strong. No, that involves a complicated knowledge. 2 and 2 is 4. No, that's a complex thing, and it's semi-deductive as well as inductive. So certain knowledge is based upon certain propositions. Propositional knowledge, not proposition. Certain propositional knowledge presupposes earlier propositional knowledge, and it is therefore not axiomatic. It's not technically axiomatic. It's not self-evident. It's not unquestionable. It can be subject to error, but things like pushing a ball moves it is self-evident and cannot be mistaken. A kid cannot find, oh, I thought pushing a ball made it roll, or go, but no. Now, you'll be tempted to say, well, when he pushes a bowling ball, it's too big, or a ball the size of a house. Imagine this is, there can be balls too big for his baby muscles to make move when he pushes against it. But that's not in his context of knowledge. That's not what he's thinking. Maybe there's a high power magnet underneath the metal ball that's going to hold it, and he can't make it move. That doesn't falsify pushing a ball absent interfering factors, which is implicit, makes it move. So after you have the first level generalizations, which cannot be mistaken, it's easier to see how knowledge can progress beyond that. And there's another factor that crucial factor that I have yet to get to. So there's a hierarchy, and the hierarchy has a base in the self-evident. is knowledge is contextual, and therefore things from outside the context of what the child is thinking of are irrelevant to what he's thinking. And the third thing is that a concept is a generalizing mechanism. This is Ayn Rand's theory of concepts, that a concept is like a file folder, she says. You put knowledge into it because you intend to apply it to future cases. So having a concept, having the right concept, Dr. Peikoff calls a green light to induction. It's set up to do an induction. Now, the first level concepts are infallible. You can't get table wrong. I had a student who told me, no, I got table wrong as a toddler because my mother tells me I called the tea caddy a table. You know, it's on wheels and it's not really a table, it's a tea caddy, it's a cart. Yeah, but that's by our usage of language. By the concept she was forming, that's fine. There's no reason not to include that. Let's take another example. A young child forming the concept dog could well look at a fox and think it was a dog. Actually, it's in the same genus as dog. It's a canine, I believe I have that right. But it's not a dog. And the child could include that in the concept dog. Hasn't he made an error? No, he just hasn't got the adult concept of dog, but he sees the similarities he sees. He can't get it wrong because he doesn't know enough to make a mistake. Paradoxically, you have to know something to make a mistake. So if all you see is, well, this looks like the other things that mommy called dog, that's not a mistake, it does. And if you form a concept for and include that, that is a different concept than the regular biological concept of dog, but is not wrong on the basis. So what could you say it's wrong? You saw a similarity. That's all you know. Conceptualize. That's good. So the first level concepts are infallible and they're set up to generalize. That's what they're there for. That's what your intention is, to open-end it, to put in new instances and new knowledge, to subsume new instances and to put in knowledge so that you can apply it for that. So that's a very long answer, but the three elements, again, knowledge is hierarchical, and you don't ask the question about 212 degrees until you understand that pushing something moves it. Drinking slakes your thirst. Milk tastes good. Cookie tastes good. That's where propositional knowledge begins. Well, it's not where all propositional knowledge begins, but that's where the first causal knowledge begins. And so first is hierarchical. Second is contextual. So don't bring in objections. What if this interfering factor occurs? That's not what the child is taking a stand on. Later, you have enough knowledge to take a stand on an induction like, do you mean that water will boil at 212 degrees even if people wish it wouldn't? Do you mean that it will boil at 212 degrees if it's in a different shaped pan? And the answer to that is yes. Do you mean it will boil at 212 degrees on the mountaintop? Now, probably you would say yes if you don't know really what boiling is. You would probably say yes, and the answer is no. So it's possible to make a mistake on that level, but not when all you know is there's water and it's wet. And the third thing is that the assigning of a concept to the entities involved in what you observe is generalization. The conceptual identification. This is paper. Paper went in fire. It burned. Those are all concepts. So it's not just, I saw this and then I saw that. You know something about what that thing is. And when I say that's paper, that doesn't mean I just know the word. It means you've held paper, touched paper, probably put it in your mouth if you're a kid. And it doesn't mean what I see there recognizes fire. It means you've gotten close enough to feel heat. And it burns doesn't just mean, oh, there's a yellow thing now. It means you see it turn black, the paper in the fire. You see smoke start to come out of it. You see the blackness spread and turn to redness. And then you see a whoosh of a flame jump up from that part that got smoky and black. So there's a lot of knowledge that you have. I mean, it's next to nothing compared to an adult, but it's not just Pavlov's dog. The bell rang and I got food. So that's a parody of even childhood observations. Well, those two did take me the half hour, but let me do the second part of. Is there anything else Rand was working on and never figured out? Yes. What was it? I don't know. If I search my memory banks, and pause, I will search my memory banks, I can maybe come up with something. She didn't understand well human irrationality, according to her. I think she understood it better than anybody else, but she was baffled by people. How could they? Because she had only a wise woman's understanding of what's going on in the minds of people who are totally alien to her. So I don't think she was working on that, but she never felt satisfied with her understanding of human irrationality from the standpoint, not of its effects, but how could a person let himself do that? She never, this is not what you mean, but she never had an opinion on gun control because she felt she hadn't studied it enough to have an opinion. I think she wanted to know more about physics and mathematics. Yes, mathematics was one thing she did work to figure out, and she took private tutoring, but she only had, I believe, 5 sessions, and she wanted to develop views on the relation between concepts, propositions, and mathematics, which she didn't really work out. She didn't have time to. She was going to write volume 2 of Introduction to Objectivist Epistemology. That's what it was called informally, volume 2. And that was going to deal with the nature of a proposition. So she covered concepts and she wanted to write on propositions, but I think she had that figured out. And one of my great regrets in life, and I mean, monumental regrets in life, is that I never asked her what would be the essential point of volume 2. One reason I didn't is that it never occurred to me she was going to die. She seemed really robust, and her doctors didn't give her any warning. So, and the third thing was I thought I didn't want to really exploit her, although I doubt she would have considered that exploitation. I felt I had to treat her as a person, not an oracle. And I wanted to have a human relationship with her insofar as I could. Now I know enough that I could have had a much more honest and open, well, when I say forthright, so that's another story. I didn't in any way deceive her or anything. I just didn't show what was going on inside me. I was stoical, and I don't think I needed to be. In fact, I know I didn't need to be. So that's all I can say, but no, it's not all, because I can say this, which is why I know that there were things, because I once asked her, do you feel like you're always learning new things? And she said, oh, yes, just like that. And I don't know how I survived yesterday, not knowing what I know today. So she was on a quest for knowledge. So there had to be things that she wanted to answer. Thank you. Hope to see you next week on HBTV. Goodbye.